Welcome everybody to the sixth edition of the GenWise Education Adda. The topic for today's conversation is liberal arts as a choice for the student of today. Right? We have Aditi, Navin, and Radha on our panel today. More on their backgrounds in the links in the chat window. I'll just paste the links to their backgrounds here shortly. As always, this session is intended to just be a trigger for conversations and further thinking. So we'll start with some introductory comments from the panelists, which will last for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll throw it open for discussions, your questions and observations. And feel free to put down your questions in the chat window as the panelists are sharing their perspectives. So Navin's on our panel as a parent today. He is a mentor with GenWise. He's taught several courses over the last 10, 12 weeks. However, the reason he's here today is he's just enrolled his son at Ashoka University. And as part of his decision-making process, Navin's penned down his thoughts in a blog post, the link to which I will share again shortly. Navin, here's a question for you. As a computer scientist from IIT Bombay and Wisconsin-Madison, it'd be great if you could actually share some of your key observations from your article and your recent experience of going through this process.
Yeah, so thanks, Rajesh. Basically, let me go through the background a little bit, right? So first of all, both my kids were not at all interested in doing an engineering or STEM degree. And if it was the previous generation, we would have just forced them to go ahead and do engineering in any case. But thankfully, we felt that now there is much more choice and they can pursue other things. That was the first thing to think about. The second is that generally I felt that the old style arts colleges, except for a few top ones in India, the others are not really that good because, even the teachers there feel that the students are doing arts because they didn't get into science, right? So that's a problem. That's the reason people don't often go to arts, because it's seen as defeat. However, the new liberal arts colleges that are coming up seemed like they are doing the right thing. They're started by people who passionately believe that we need to be able to, teach the best humanities and STEM courses to the students, plus very high level quality of faculty there. Okay, so that was the thought process. The other thing that I heard was that the other thing is I follow Dheeraj Sanghi, who is also a JEE high ranker, IIT Kanpur professor, IIT Delhi mentor, and now Punjab Engineering College head, and he wrote a blog saying that today, if he had to make the choice again, he would not go for IIT, he would go for liberal arts. So that's how my thought process started. And what I really like about liberal arts is the fact that you don't have to choose your degree or your branch when you join. After you join it, you can spend a year exploring what you want to do, and only then you declare your major. And the second thing is that you can still have a minor in something that seems completely unrelated, at least by the old standards, right? So these are the things that really drew me towards liberal arts. So that's my thought process.
Hey, thanks, Navin. We can dig more into your perspectives when the questions start rolling in. I'll move on to Aditi. Aditi is on our panel today representing the voice of the student that has she's pursued a very different path. Actually dropping out of traditional school in 11th grade and moving on to get degrees in liberal arts from Ambedkar University and Harvard. Aditi, it'd be great if you could add to Navin's observations and share your own perspectives from personal experience.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rajesh, for that introduction. So when I was in school, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I still don't. This is 10 years now. And I think a few things that I had going for me was my parents trusted me to try out different things. And the environments I was in also encouraged that. So I would say my liberal arts education sort of began in 8th standard when I moved to Rishi Valley School, where Radha was actually my teacher. And right from there, I think a couple of ideas that I picked up were, one, that the subjects we study are not in silos. I mean, we're taught that physics is very different from chemistry, which is very different from computer science. But there are a lot of interconnections that we might miss if we see them as completely separate subjects. The second thing I learned was the importance of inquiry, just asking questions. Things that are told to us or taught to us are not gospel. If we can create a space to question them and follow some kind of disciplined inquiry about it, there's a lot more depth in learning that we can gain from there. And finally, that there's a sort of onus on us to decide how we want to learn about the world, how we want to explore it, what is our place in the world over here. So I would say those are the sort of hallmarks of a liberal arts education, which I continue to follow. I didn't see a way to pursue that in 11th and 12th, so I sort of dropped out after school, after 1 year of formal school in 11th standard, and pursued a range of subjects through the open schooling stream. And then again, I couldn't make up my mind about a specific major, although I knew I wanted to study education. So I picked a very flexible liberal arts degree from Ambedkar University, where I didn't even need to choose a major. I chose 3 minors. And I started off thinking, okay, I want to change the world, so why don't I study sociology so I understand how society works? Eventually realized, okay, I may want to pick up some economics, some math, picked up some computer science along the way. And so I ended up in the research field. And so, I changed my mind at multiple points, but this to me feels like, if I had to talk to someone, a younger cousin today, I would say, you don't know what you want to do, but you can discover it through action. And for people who are told that, you have so much clarity, well, that clarity comes from trying out different things. So I would say as a student, it's possible today to do that, which wasn't possible in my parents' generation, for example. And there's lots of choices there, starting from how I want to express myself in my admissions essay, what subjects I want to choose, what activities I want to be a part of, how I can pursue internships along the side, and just choose from a whole gamut of options. So I see that as a sort of very happy student today that we have all of these options.
Hey, that's wonderful. Thanks. That's a very interesting path you've taken. And as you said, you're still trying to find the bigger path, right? Thanks, Aditi, for that initial thoughts. I'll move on to Radha. Radha is our quintessential educator. As you might have heard Aditi say, Radha has been has been Aditi's teacher as well at Rishi Valley, as well as guiding scores of youngsters to find their own paths. And it'll be very interesting to hear from you, Radha, what role the adult, in this case, educator or parent, can play in this whole context we're discussing about pursuing liberal arts or otherwise.
Thanks, Rajesh. And it's lovely to see so many people, really sort of interested in exploring this whole issue of liberal arts. So just coming from an educator's perspective, or even from just an adult who's, who's talking to younger people. See, one of the things is that there's so much, so there are a couple of things, right? One is so much stress on knowing what you want to do. And when a young person appears or is telling you that I'm really not sure what I want to do, then there is enormous pressure from both the school system and from the home system as well, because it's seen as a point of failure. And although today it is a little different in certain sections of our society, but by and large, most children today continue to face this problem of pressure to choose, to pick a direction that you want to go in, right? Now, while liberal arts allows for, a much, so for example, when you're not really clear about where you want to go, you're not sure what it is that you want to do or want to be, the liberal arts program is very, very accommodating in that sense. And of course, we can talk later about there are liberal arts programs and there are liberal arts programs. So you really have to be very careful. But I feel more so what my experience has been is, when young people have come to me, I've always tried to understand from them about, why do they feel this pressure to pick something, right? And then have a conversation around, what is it that really interests you? What is it that you really want to do? And really sort of focus more on building confidence in the young person, okay? as opposed to undermining that confidence by saying, if you don't pick this, then, you know, it's a disaster. However, having said this, there are a whole bunch of students who really have to pick a more formal line of education, right? But even for them to be able to provide support and confidence in even picking, you know, which line may be more suitable for them in terms of not just their interests, but also in the end goal, which often is to be able to get into an educational stream that gets them a job. You know, so liberal arts I mean, it's not liberal arts versus this, but I think in this discussion on liberal arts, we sort of have to look at what method of learning, what stream of learning, what approach of learning is appropriate for a given young person. I think that's very important. And I think liberal arts is wonderful when you can afford to pursue liberal arts, when you have the privilege and the opportunity to do it. And if you do, then I think it's important that we encourage young people to pick the right liberal arts school or the right liberal arts environment. And I must say, in India, we have some really wonderful liberal arts spaces. So I think I'll stop there, Rajesh, and then we can continue.
Great, thanks for the big picture, Radha. Any questions so far? I see a comment from Lise Francis. Thanks for your comment, Lise. If there's any questions that you'd like to ask, please go ahead. Otherwise, I have one follow-up question while you guys are thinking about what's on your mind. Navin, you know, Radha mentioned affordability. If you can afford it, and then there was Aditi mentioned flexibility. What are some other considerations? I mean, if you look at it from a student profile, what are your thoughts in terms of, you know, what type of a student would liberal arts be appropriate for? Navin, you're on mute.
Sorry. The thing is that some students, by the time they're done with 12th, know exactly what they want to do. And for the last few years, they have been doing extracurricular courses or little projects or reading books on that topic. Those students should directly go for a specialized course in that topic, right? No point in beating about the bush with liberal arts, although they can, I mean, whatever course they're doing, they should try to do other courses outside their field also, but they can go directly for the specialization. The problem is that a vast majority of the students are actually don't know what they want to do, or the ones that think they know what to do are doing that on the basis of just something they heard or how that subject was taught in 11th standard, right? And those people, the ones who are unclear what they want to do, they should go for liberal arts. They should explore so that the decision is made on the basis of something concrete and not just what your friend said and what your dad wants to do and so on, right? The other thing is that this is certainly a course for privileged students, because what I'm hearing from everyone is that the scope is broadened so much for you that it takes a few years after your degree to sort of figure out exactly what you want to do. There's a little bit of uncertainty. The employers and industry in general doesn't really know what this degree is and how to use the students. So there isn't a very long line of jobs waiting for you immediately. You sort of have to figure it out on your own a little bit. But in the end, it turns out to be more satisfying than if you went in for a degree that you were not really keen on.
Right. Okay, plenty of questions and comments from folks on the meeting. I'm just going to pick some. I mean, before we get into the questions, I want all of you to pay attention to the chat window. Navin shared some links. I've shared some links. Navin's the quintessential diligent researcher. He's come up, collated a list of comments and observations from tons of students that are pursuing liberal arts today. So please take a look at that as well. So let's start with the basics. I think Bala wants to understand what are the exact courses that would come under the term liberal arts. Navin, would you want to go?
right? So basically liberal arts includes everything, right? So just yesterday I was looking at Ashoka's list of majors, and they have 12 different majors you could be doing. 5 of those are sciences, so physics, maths, biology, computer science, maths, STEM subjects, and the other 7 are a mix of arts and commerce. So then it would include everything from psychology, political science, economics, finance, etc. That being said, because it's a little broad, every college isn't as good in every area, right? So you have to research your colleges. So generally, for example, Flame in Pune, I believe, is pretty strong in business and finance and so on. Ashoka is quite strong in the humanities. I hear that, say, Premji University focuses on the social sector and so on, right? You have to research the college a little bit, but pretty much everything, I mean, you want to do, there is at least some of that is there in liberal arts.
And maybe we can take the most recent question. What are the top 5 liberal arts colleges in India? I think Navin touched on at least 3 of them: Ashoka, Flame, Azim Premji. I've heard of Kriya, Ambedkar. Aditi is from Ambedkar. Anything else that comes to mind, panelists?
Yeah. So Symbiosis School of Liberal Arts is one that many people would have heard of because it is the oldest. It predates all these others by almost 7-8 years. It's an okay college. I mean, it was, one problem with Symbiosis is that it's part of the whole Symbiosis system. So my guess is that the quality isn't as good as these top 5, but it is right after these 4 or 5.
Right. Okay. Vishnu says Ahmedabad University, and Chetan is asking about Mumbai Narsi Monji.
So one issue I have with some of these older school ones, right, is that, liberal arts is 2 different things. One is that it's a more flexible way of setting up a curriculum, but it is also, a new way of thinking, both, even within individual courses. And it is not necessary that just because a college administration decided to change the structure, that the people also changed, right? So you have to be careful about that. If the people are still old style, the teachers, then it's not going to be a real liberal arts degree. So you have to be careful of that a bit.
Yeah, Rajesh, actually to add to a couple of things. One is about the subjects, right? I think it was what courses exactly fall under liberal arts, right? And also, just to follow up on what Navin just said. See, the thing is that an important role is also played by counselors in each of these places, academic counselors. And I know that, Aditi, we were talking about it yesterday, that, because when students go in as parents, often, or even as people who are advising them from the outside, we do our research and you sort of pick the school that seems to match various criteria. Parents could have a number of criteria. One is, of course, you're looking at which is the best school for your child, then in terms of affordability, in terms of location, just so many things, so many criteria that parents look at before they send their children away from home, right? So, but once the children are in these universities, it's also very important to understand which of these colleges or universities do have a pretty strong academic counseling process, because I'd like Aditi to add to what I'm saying from her own experience. It's because once you're in there and every course looks exciting. To me, every course looks exciting in many of these places. But then how do you pick and choose? Because periodically you have to change your programs or courses, as they're called, right? So how does one go about doing that, and what kind of support is provided by that university? I think a little bit of homework on that also helps. And I'm just going to leave it to Aditi to fill that bit from your experience.
Yeah. I think so. To add to Navin's point about affordability, it's not just how much you can afford the fees of this, but how much you can afford to deal with uncertainty. So as a parent, I would encourage you all to think about how comfortable am I with my child changing their mind. If you think that is a no-no, then maybe the liberal arts is not the best environment, because you're going to see lots of different courses, lots of different fields for which jobs do not exist today, but will exist 3 to 5 years down the line. So we're dealing with a completely new field over here to which there aren't very straight answers. So that's maybe another criteria to think about over here. And Radhaka, I think you touched upon a point of, how to pick subjects. And I'm seeing a comment in the chat about mixing up what we consider, separated streams. So today, I think it's really cool if a computer scientist, if someone can study computer science with arts on the side, right? Because then you build very specific skills in both design, execution, all of that together. Or someone who comes with a humanities background, tries to study social sciences, but picks up economics, because then you can do a lot of quantitative research in what are considered the soft social sciences. So these fields aren't very well defined, but they exist. The intersection of almost any discipline exists if you're willing to look a little bit outside India over here. And jobs for those are also coming up, because today I think industry, academia is realizing that we cannot continue to stay in these separate boxes. We need people who can speak different languages. And third point, I saw a comment about, jack of all trades, master of none. And I would say, I think I put myself very much in that box. But two things, one thread that I see running through it all is education, right? By being in a computer science class, a math class, a social science class, I can see how teaching is done very differently. And maybe there are things we want to borrow and mix and match from these. And the other thing is, I feel like I can speak to different people and sort of act as a bridge. Otherwise, today it's really hard for me to imagine someone who's done a very traditional engineering degree to be able to talk to someone who's done a very traditional sort of history degree, right? Because they just don't share the same language, the same worldview, anything like that. And I think this has larger implications for society as well. If we cannot have people who talk to each other, we're kind of doomed.
Well, I want to add one thing to the jack of all trades thing. You will be surprised at how many roles in the industry actually want jack of all trades and don't want a master, right? In a company of 100, I would guess that there'll be 5 roles that require a master, and most of the others need a jack of various trades. Especially as you go higher up on the ladder, that becomes more and more important, and mastery of just one area becomes less and less important.
And the ability to be able to think across disciplines. I mean, we talked a little bit about it in the last Adda, the importance of interdisciplinarity and the importance of being able to, and also when, like both of you said, when you're sitting as a team to solve, I mean, most problems today and likely to happen in the future, the challenges that we face as a society, I mean, it's an imperative, right, that you're able to sit across a multidisciplinary and participate and engage in a multidisciplinary team and a multidisciplinary approach. So for something like that, it's the fundamental way of thinking has to change, right? And for those who can do this, I think it's very important that we have more and more people who are able to be what is called a generalist, which was a pejorative earlier, but now, and as Vishnu likes to say, a versatilist, right, in GenWise. So I think we have to also, I mean, it's about really thinking a little bit differently about the whole process of learning and what kind of the next generation, what kind of the new generation is required. Yeah.
Rajesh, you are muted.
You're muted, Rajesh.
Sorry about that. There's a very exciting action going on in the chat window. For those of you who are not following the chat window, questions are being posed and answers are being provided as well. Please also have a look there. Does anybody want to share your perspectives instead of just putting down some of these thoughts? Chetan, you're saying you hear that the future is skills driven rather than degree based. And how does the liberal arts course help in this context? Do you want to just share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rajesh. So I predominantly am a industrial engineer, having done my MBA, and thereafter I've worked in IT industry for 20 years. So what I hear and what I also see in the marketplace today is that the focus is on skills. Mm-hmm. So what I understand from that is purely my perception, that if you're good at certain things, you will be in demand. If you generally do a degree or something, like for example, the engineering, it is also sort of introduction to lot many subjects, and then you, as you go, in our times it was, as you go into the industry, that is the time you get the right skill working for that company. So how does liberal arts fit into this kind of scenario, wherein eventually the demand would be for a skill, is what I understand. How does liberal art help in that front? Are we taking some additional years to a career to decide upon certain things which otherwise could be saved, is what I'm asking? Or is it something else that we are talking about?
Question on every parent's mind, I'm sure.
Mm.
So Radha, Navin, Aditi.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take a shot at it and then. I mean, so when you say there are two things, Chetan, that I wanted to comment on. One is you said, the future skill driven, and the other point is how does liberal arts course help, right? So when we talk about skill driven, I mean, so there are in the learning process, right? One is, of course, changing the way you think. That's very fundamental to the learning process, right? To be able to think across, to be able to think in a way, the traditional form of thinking has allowed us to be deeply compartmentalized, but to be able to break that and think across and think laterally and sort of, and I keep using this analogy. It's like, you not only have to have the ability to sort of look through the microscope, but you also have to be able to zoom out and think telescopically. So you're constantly having to do this if for the future. Okay, this is a very, very important aspect of how an individual has to evolve for the future. So when we talk about skill is something that can be learned at various points. Okay, but this fundamental way of thinking, I think this is where a good liberal arts course would help, is to be able to think across disciplines, to be able to think laterally, to be able to think things through. And what is increasingly being used, of course, the phrase that's increasingly being used is critical thinking. So I think for me, that is a more fundamental thing. And then, yeah.
Thanks, Radha. And I think this goes back to our last week's Adda as well, where Radha and others spoke of the importance of breaking silos, thinking laterally, interdisciplinary thinking, and so on. Navin, do you want to add more to what Radha and Aditi after that?
I want to channel Jayati Doshi, a liberal arts student who I met on Twitter. And she did liberal arts in Flame, followed by Harvard University, and she pointed out this thing about skills, right? Yes, skills are more important than the degree. Right now, as far as skills is concerned, the standard courses have an advantage simply because employers already know what skills those degrees provide. Okay, that doesn't mean that there aren't skills in the liberal arts degrees. There are lots of skills, very important skills. These are slightly softer, but I would argue that they are more important. What the liberal arts graduates need to do is, don't talk about that I did this course or I did this degree, because the employer doesn't understand. But they should be able to articulate that I have this skill, which you are going to need, right? So just to take an example, a history graduate can say something like, I have skill in finding sources of information given any problem, then being able to tell which ones are biased in which directions, which one has good quality, and then put all of that together into a coherent argument, right? When you say something like this, usually, Jayati points out, is that the employer's reaction is, oh my God, we need these skills, we just didn't know how to put it in a JD.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's a question for Aditi about NEOM, the NIOS thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll share a website where you can learn more about it. But NIOS is for those of you who have heard of Indira Gandhi Open University, where you can pursue distance learning. It's basically that, but for class 10 and class 12. So you can apply for it. Anyone can get in as long as you can provide the right papers. You can pick a mix of subjects. So English is the only compulsory subject, but apart from that, I picked economics, accounts, history, and psychology. So that would be a classic commerce and arts mix, which most schools do not allow in the country. I would say very few schools allow. And NIOS is accepted at every public school in the country. They cannot legally disallow you from applying. So I got in very easily with Ambedkar University. And even later on when I did my postgraduate at Harvard, there was never an issue with that. And so, when thinking about is doing this degree going to allow me to go through anything else, I would say just think about, what's going to keep your options open. Like, for example, I did math in the third year of my college because I didn't want to be seen as someone who only did the sort of soft end of the social sciences. So that was not because I wanted to specialize in math, but because I didn't want to be passed off for someone who didn't have this particular skill, so to speak. So I would say, like, think about what's going to allow you to move to the next stage. But many of the things that you get on paper, right? The degree, the subject, those act more as filters rather than signals of the most important abilities, if that makes sense. So that goes back to what Navin said, right? Like, if you take history as history in face value, you're not seeing the skills underneath that. And so when you're applying for postgrad, especially outside India, you have a chance to show, what I have learned through doing this. And that may not be apparent to you right now, based on what your child is going to do later on. But a little bit of decoding what do people actually do in these fields might be very helpful to sort of reverse engineer and find out, what's the best way to become a historian. Or if you want to end up even at a consultancy, right? What are the skills and how can I communicate that? A degree is one way, internships are another way, projects are another way. So my other sort of encouragement here would be to look outside formal education as well, beyond what institutions provide, to see what students can take up on their own, to communicate what they're able to do. Because I think everyone wants self-starters, right? And if you can start doing that early on, it's just a win-win for everyone over here.
Thank you, guys. Again, there's more and more questions coming, but I'm going to ask one of my own questions, please, because Navin and Radha and Aditi are anyway responding to questions on the chat window. First of all, we may not be able to answer or address or discuss all of these questions. I'm so excited that, this created some interest. We can stay in touch. I mean, you can tell us what your questions are. We'll try and respond to you offline as well if we run out of time, right? So there's a provocative article against what currently passes off as liberal arts. This was written 5 years ago by Vinod Khosla, right? Where he kind of argues that liberal arts is the easier curriculum, right, to get through college. And he also says that this may be the single biggest reason students seem to prefer it. I mean, again, this has a Western context to it, right? The US, European context to it, right? I mean, is this getting away from difficult subjects like math and science, right? How should parents, educators kind of, if somebody says, I don't want to do math and science, I'm going to do liberal arts, how do you kind of distill out the underlying reasons behind that? Radha, would you just share your perspectives on that, please?
That is a very provocative article, yes.
I'm going to share a link to that article for everybody to read. Pretty long one.
I want to come back to the experience that Aditi had shared earlier about the math thing, right? I mean, so one is what Navin said earlier, when a child is very clear about what direction they want to take or what they are passionate about, and they've started doing these things early and preparing themselves, then they go for that, yeah? But then to say that it is a way to get away from soft skills, I mean, it's sort of a cop-out a little bit. I am afraid I don't buy that, because it also, that means you're putting all students who want to pursue a liberal arts program in this little basket, okay, which is not true. Because I also look at it in another way, those who can afford to pursue the liberal arts program, it also requires a certain amount of courage on the part of the parents and the child, both, okay. So, and also given, all of the things that everybody's said so far about the kind of thinking and skills that are required for the future, I would say more than being a cop-out, it is also a way to sort of equip yourself with the ability to be able to deal with uncertainty to some extent. But the caveat here is that you pick, that is the kind of courses you pick, the kind of program you pick, that is very, very important. Otherwise, you can drift. And I know students who have drifted, who have sort of lost themselves in this whole process of the liberal arts program. And that is not, yeah, and that's a very difficult situation. So the caveat here is that you have to be very clear about, you have to have enough support to be able to pick the kind of subjects, and like Aditi shared her experience with Ambedkar, she picked a whole bunch of, you know, so-called soft skills and minors, and then moved on to picking things which then allowed her to shape her education future. So I think it's very difficult to have a very polarized position on this. I think it's very context specific. And I've escaped that question now.
Well, as I was telling Sir Kavya here, I think he's in violent agreement with how liberal arts programs are already changing, right?
Yes.
Today's needs.
Yes.
So there are some questions about India versus abroad. You know, are there any comments you'd like to share in terms of how do people weigh these two options? What criteria, what parameters, cost, content, quality? Why are you laughing, Radha?
Because Aditi is like ready to tell you.
Okay, great.
I just got back from the US.
Just got back from the
refugee,
US.
and I have lots of strong thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So quickly, I think three decision points in my life. One was, should I do my UG in India or abroad? I chose India, one, because I knew I wasn't very clear on what I wanted to study. And so I wasn't ready to go be so uncertain about it that I would spend, I don't know, 40, 80 lakhs on it and still be unsure. So, and I also wanted to sort of be in India, understand India. So I chose the UG over here. Next, I think I finished that. I did work. I worked in research for a year. And then it was very clear that the skills I wanted to pick in assessment and psychometrics, I could not learn that in India. So it was a straight, there the answer was very clear that for my specific context, the US was a good idea. So went there, and then the third decision was, do I want to stay there and work, or do I want to come back? And I'm sure, as everyone's reading, the US is not very friendly to immigrants right now, and especially not in fields that are sort of have less demand or less pay. So to support yourself over there is really, really difficult. And so, but that's just my story, right? If I ended up doing data science or something super lucrative like that, I'm sure my decision would have been different over here. So I just want to say there are no straight answers, and depending on which major industry organization you want to work on, you would pick accordingly.
Thank you. Navin, you had something around the cost. I think it's what, roughly 25% of the cost to send somebody to the US for a liberal arts degree?
Probably. I mean, basically in India, it will be about around 6 to 10 lakhs per year, whereas abroad it will be much more. And like Aditi pointed out, a very important thing, just taking US for example, even before this anti-immigrant stuff, it was very difficult for liberal arts students, I mean basically any non-STEM students, to get an H1 visa, right? So many of them would have to be forced to come back to India. And then if you don't have money to just, you know, I mean, if that money bites you and you want a return on investment, then probably it's not a great idea, right? There are lots of people for whom the money is not a problem, in which case definitely go abroad because the quality is much better. But otherwise, what Aditi did, right? Do an undergraduate in India, it's fairly decent. And for the cost, it is great. And then do a postgraduate in abroad.
Radha, do you want to add your perspectives? You know, we were speaking recently about how liberal arts graduates students doing liberal arts programs in their UG in India seem to be a lot more invested in the local context.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was very important actually, you know, because we've had students who've gone abroad, and those who are studying in the few liberal arts colleges that started earlier, say for example, Ashoka or APU, etc. So there, what I found was that students, particularly when you do your undergrad in India, and I think this holds for whether you do liberal arts or any other program, it really allows you to sort of build your context, and also university is a time where you begin to really engage with the external world a lot more. Okay, whether you engage socially, culturally, or through or through the academic stream, through projects. So it builds a certain sensibility and context for a young person, and I think that's very, very important. And often, and particularly if the young person is very, is very keen on bringing about some sort of a difference, which I think a lot of young people are. Okay. But then when you, for the students that I've seen who've gone abroad for undergrad, particularly for, say, liberal arts, one is that context doesn't exist anymore, okay? The cultural context or the political context even. And I'm not sure this is a very, so this is something that a lot of people may sort of, what shall I say, agree with. But I think it's very, very important to build this cultural, political, citizenry context for a young person. Okay, not to talk about it from a nationalistic perspective or anything, but I think you engage more easily in your cultural and in your socio-cultural context. And I think you identify with it more. Like yesterday when we were talking about it, and Aditi was saying, when you're plonked in front of Jamia and you're asked to sort of engage directly there with the reality, it builds a very different, it builds an extremely different kind of sensibility. And I think that is what I found was the difficulty many times with young people when they went off to do their programs, particularly in liberal arts abroad. So, and I think some of the programs in India, some of the liberal arts programs are very, very good in terms of how they provide this kind of exposure and opportunity. Yeah.
Great. I mean, we have just about a minute to go. Unless somebody has something really important to ask of our panelists, I think we will just bring this to a close. I have suggested that you could write into us with your questions, and we'll try our best to get responses from our panelists. I also want to remind everybody that we have another exciting session next week where we're going to talk about a very a problem that is becoming ever more in your face these days about dealing with negative emotions in our children. We have Dr. Bhushan Shukla, psychotherapist, psychiatrist, adolescent psychiatrist with us again next week. So if you're interested, please do go ahead and register. Thanks for participating with such great interest. See you all again soon. Thank you to the panelists as well.
Thanks all of you. That was great. That was such a vibrant discussion. Yeah. Thanks everybody. Thanks a lot.